So today I'm reading from two essays on analytical psychology by C.G. Jung. This is volume 7 of the Collected Works of C.G. Jung. What I'm first going to do is read 3 of the prefaces of this book because I think they're so important. And I'll start in the middle of the preface to the first edition, which was from 1917. So this is preface to the first edition. I regard the problem of the unconscious as so important and so topical that it would, in my opinion, be a great loss if this question, which touches each one of us so closely, were to disappear from the orbit of the educated lay public by being banished to some inaccessible technical journal, there to lead a shadowy paper existence on the shelves of libraries. The psychological concomitants of the present war, above all the incredible brutalization of public opinion, the mutual slanderings, the unprecedented fury of destruction, the monstrous flood of lies, man's incapacity to call a halt to the bloody demon, are uniquely fitted to force upon the attention of every thinking person the problem of the chaotic unconscious, which slumbers uneasily beneath the ordered world of consciousness. This war has pitilessly revealed to civilized man that he is still a barbarian, and has at the same time shown what an iron scourge lies this is behind the scenes reading, so it's unedited. I apologize for that. Now, where was I? Okay. And has at the same time shown what an iron scourge lies in store for him if ever again he should be tempted to make his neighbor responsible for his own evil qualities. The psychology of the individual is reflected in the psychology of the nation. What the nation does is done also by each individual, and so long as the individual continues to do it, the nation will do likewise. Only a change in the attitude of the individual can initiate a change in the psychology of the nation. The great problems of humanity were never yet solved by general laws, but only through regeneration of the attitudes of individuals. If ever there was a time when self-reflection was the absolutely necessary and only right thing, it is now, in our present catastrophic epoch. Yet whoever reflects upon himself is bound to strike upon the frontiers of the unconscious, which contains what above all else he needs to know. C.G. Jung, Zurich, December 1916. So he wrote that in the midst of World War I. Preface to the second edition, 1918. I am glad that it has been the lot of this little book to pass into a second edition in so short a time, despite the difficulties it must have presented to many readers. I am letting the second edition appear unaltered except for a few minor modifications and improvements, although I am aware that the last chapters in particular, owing to the extraordinary difficulty and the novelty of the material, really needed really needed discussion on a much broader basis in order to be generally understood. But a more detailed treatment of the fundamental principles there outlined would far exceed the bounds of a more or less popular presentation, so that I preferred to treat these questions with due circumstantiality in a separate work which is now in preparation. That work was Psychological Types. From the many communications I received from the publication of the first edition, I have discovered that even among the wider public, interest in the problems of the human psyche is very much keener than I expected. This interest may be due in no small measure to the profound shock which our consciousness sustained through the World War. The spectacle of this catastrophe threw man back upon himself by making him feel his complete impotence. It turned his gaze inwards, and with everything rocking about him, he must needs seek something that guarantees him a hold. Too many still look outwards, some believing in the illusion of victory and of victorious power, others in treaties and laws, and others again in the overthrow of the existing order. But still too few look inwards, to their own selves, and still fewer ask themselves whether the ends of human society might not best be served if each man tried to abolish the old order in himself and to practice in his own person and in his own inward state those precepts, those victories which he preaches at every street corner, instead of always expecting these things of his fellow men. Every individual needs revolution, the inner division, overthrow of the existing order, and renewal, but not by forcing them upon his neighbors under the hypocritical cloak of Christian love or the sense of social responsibility, or of the other beautiful euphemisms for unconscious urges to personal power. Individual self-reflection, return of the individual to the ground of human nature, to his own deepest being with its individual and social destiny, here is the beginning of a cure for that blindness that reigns at the present hour. Interest in the problem of the human psyche is a symptom of this instinctive return to oneself. It is to serve this interest that the present book was written. C.G. Jung, October 1919. So at the time he was writing this, World War I was still on. It ended on it was C.G. Jung, October 1918, which was 1 month before the end of World War I. So then, preface to the third edition, 1926. This book was written during the World War, and it owes its existence primarily to the psychological repercussions of that great event. Now that the war is over, the waves are beginning to subside again, but the great psychological problems that the war threw up still occupy the mind and heart of every thinking and feeling person. It is probably thanks to this that my little book has survived the post-war period and now appears in a third edition. In view of the fact that 7 years have elapsed since the publication of the first edition, I have deemed it necessary to undertake fairly extensive alterations and improvements, particularly in the chapters on types and on the unconscious, the chapter on the development of the types in the analytical process, I have omitted entirely at this question, as this question has since received comprehensive treatment in my book, Psychological Types, to which I must refer the interested reader. Anyone who has tried to popularize highly complicated material that is still in the process of scientific development will agree with me that this is no easy task. It is even more difficult than many of the psychological processes and problems I have to discuss here are quite unknown to most people. Much of what I say may arouse their prejudices or may appear arbitrary, but they should bear in mind that the purpose of such a book can be, at most, to give them a rough idea of its subject and to provoke thought, but not to enter into all the details of the argument. I shall be quite satisfied if my book fulfills this purpose. C.G. Jung, April 1925. Okay, this book goes on, and it's now in multiple printings going on into the current moment, and it's over 100 years old. And obviously, the themes of this book are very much still alive. Let me see. So Dr. Jung was in an essay entitled "The Personal and the Collective Unconscious." He was talking about political conversion. So I will read a specific paragraph that I think is relevant here. Okay, so I'm reading from two essays on analytical psychology by C.G. Jung, which is volume 7 of the Collected Works of C.G. Jung, and I'm reading paragraph 116. The point is not conversion into the opposite, but conservation of previous values together with recognition of their opposites. Naturally, this means conflict and self-division. It is understandable enough that one should shrink from it, philosophically as well as morally. Hence the alternative sought, more often than conversion into the opposite, is a convulsive stiffening of the previous attitude. It must be admitted that, in the case of elderly men, this is a phenomenon of no little merit. However disagreeable it may be, at least they do not become renegades. They remain upright. They do not fall into muddle-headedness, nor yet into the mud. They are no defaulters, but are merely dead wood, or, to put it more politely, pillars of the past. But the accompanying symptoms, the rigidity, the narrow-mindedness, the standoffishness of these laudator temporis acti the narrow-mindedness, the standoffishness of these laudator temporis acti are unpleasant, not to say harmful, for their method of espousing a truth or any other value is so inflexible and violent that their unmannerliness repels more than the truth attracts, so the result is the opposite of the intended good. The fundamental cause of their rigidity is fear of the problem of opposites. They have a foreboding and secret dread of the sinister brother of the sinister and secret dread of the sinister brother of martyrdus. Therefore, there must be only one truth and one guiding principle of action, and that must be absolute. Otherwise, it affords no protection against the impending disaster, which is sensed everywhere save in themselves. But actually, the most dangerous revolutionary is within ourselves, and all must realize this who wish to pass over safely into the second half of life. Certainly, this means exchanging the apparent security we have so far enjoyed for a condition of insecurity, of internal division, of contradictory convictions. The worst features of all is that there appears to be no way out of this condition. There is no middle way. Okay, that's one. That's an early paragraph. Okay, I had set one aside, but it seems to be from another book, so I'm going to have to research where I got it. It's just on my copy at the moment. Okay, now I also want to read paragraph, so I'm reading today from 2 essays on analytical psychology by C.G. Jung, and I'm reading from page 236, paragraph 395. On psychological grounds, therefore, I would recommend that no God be constructed out of the archetype of the man of personality. In other words, we must not be concretized, for only thus can I avoid projecting my values and non-values into God. Into God and the devil, and only that. In other words, he must not be concretized, for only thus can I avoid projecting my values and non-values into God and the devil. Only thus can I preserve my human dignity, my specific gravity, which I need so much if I am not to become the unresisting shuttlecock of unconscious forces. In his dealings with the invisible world, a man must certainly be mad to suppose that he is the master of this world. Here we follow, quite naturally, the principle of non-resistance to all superior forces up to a certain individual limit, beyond which the most peaceful citizen becomes a bloody revolutionary. Our bowing down before law and order is a commendable example of what our general attitude to the collective unconscious should be. Thus far, our obeisance would not be too difficult, but there are other factors in the world to which our conscience does not give unqualified assent, and yet we bow to them. Why? Because in practice it is more expedient than the reverse. Similarly, there are factors in the unconscious with regard to which we must be worldly wise. In parentheses, he has several biblical quotes. Resist not evil, and make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, and the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Ergo, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And those were all quotes from the Bible. Unfortunately, I do not have the biblical references at the moment. Okay, I think one thing I might also do is read a definition here of the collective unconscious, and that's found on page 298 in paragraph 507. The collective unconscious. By this is meant that part of the unconscious which consists on the one hand of unconscious perceptions of external reality, and on the other of all the residues of the phylogenetic, perceptive, and adaptive functions. A reconstruction of the unconscious view of the world would yield a picture showing how external reality has been perceived from time immemorial. The collective unconscious contains, or is, an historical mirror image of the world. It too is a world, but a world of images. And then a little further, since the world of consciousness, like the world of the unconscious, is to a large extent collective, these two spheres together form the collective psyche in the individual. Okay, leaving that aside. So there's an essay entitled "The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious," and I beg your pardon. That's the one I was thinking of. No. Let me see if it's this book. No. Okay. Okay. All right, I'm going to save this other paragraph right here until I can find what book I took it out of. So that will conclude my reading for today. I'll take any comments or questions, and then I'm going to move on. Grenade, the ego does not always exist outside of the unconscious. When you're born, you have essentially no ego. You're essentially all self. And as you know from witnessing any baby, babies are little kings and queens because they think they control everything. And to a degree that they're right, but they have no ego at that point. And they don't start to use the term I, which would be indicative of ego, until about age 3. And so, one other thing I might mention is that Dr. Edinger made the comment that it's imperative for a young psyche to think that it is good, and that it's a good boy or a good girl and doing the right thing, because otherwise it can be devastating to them. And so I'm going to terminate now, unless there are other questions immediately, as I have something else to do. And I'll be back tonight at 8 p.m. and we will be discussing about the Spirit Mercurius, which turns out to be the Spirit. And we'll talk about that at great length this evening. So I will see you then.